Okay, welcome everybody, and welcome to our second session in Room 2. And very pleased to introduce Graham Berrisford, who's going to talk about mapping TOGAF to ArchiMate.
Okay. If you haven't got one of these, okay, you've got there the talk I'm not giving. I started off, I've been leading a project to refresh all the TOGAF artifacts. Well, about 50 of them anyway, 59, about 50 of them. And I was just going to go through the diagrams and produce an ArchiMate version. I mean, that's just very boring. So I put some of the diagrams in there. There's also a paper at the back. So what you've got is like 2 chapters. There's a boring, just here's a bit of TOGAF illustrated by ArchiMate slide. And then there's a paper at the back on the concepts. Because I think the challenge is not really in drawing diagrams. Anybody can take the ArchiMate set of symbols and take a TOGAF diagram and produce something. That's not the challenge. The problem is the concepts of the diagrams and what they mean, which in a way relates to the data architecture issue to do with vocabularies in an organisation. So, although it says mapping ArchiMate to TOGAF, it's really mapping TOGAF to ArchiMate. I'm harmonising the conceptual frameworks as best I can. What do we want for enterprise architecture? What is needed for the architectural design and planning and large-scale changes to business systems? We need processes, we need products, and we need advice on people in all kinds of dimensions. If you're interested in people, well, you're probably not, because if you're interested in people, you've been next door with Tom Greggs. So it's like left brain, right brain.
I'm interested in people, but I felt I needed to be brought back into the
So, Tom and I are opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of the content here. So I'm not going to be talking about people. Process and products. Most enterprise architecture frameworks focus on the products. TOGAF is known for its strength and the process side. So TOGAF best known for its process, the architecture development method. I'm not going to talk about process at all. It offers a menu of lightly defined products, deliverables, think documents, artifacts, think catalogues. ArchiMate doesn't help you with the catalogues. Matrices, like web matrices, ArchiMate doesn't help you with the matrices. And diagrams. And ArchiMate is a much more limited standard. Sometimes people say, why can't TOGAF be more like ArchiMate? Well, TOGAF has, an ArchiMate has a very limited ambition. It's to provide a modeling language for diagrams. So you think a perfect marriage. They're both standards in the open group, and you'd think that the open group would have some sort of editorial control that makes sure these things are talking about the same thing. There are, getting on for 60 TOGAF artifact types now. There is an artifact type taxonomy in TOGAF. TOGAF 9.2 has been published recently, by the way. Hands up if you've got a TOGAF certificate. Hands up if you know, if you looked at ArchiMate at all. Okay, so obviously a small majority has some experience of both, and I'm assuming a lot of knowledge here. This is my tidying up of the artifact taxonomy. I was going to put this as a change request, but in the small group we didn't get as far as doing this. Preliminary vision, requirements planning. There's a huge amount of emphasis on business architecture. Data applications, technology and implementation. Sometimes we say TOGAF is IT specific. Well, actually, there's a huge amount there is on the business architecture. This is the ArchiMate symbols. Well, if I was to go through all the artifacts, 50, 60 artifacts and 50, 60 symbols, I'd be here for an hour or two. I'm not going to do that. Unlike UML, which you may know, UML comes with a set of diagram types. There's about 14 standard diagram types. ArchiMate starts from the individual concepts, which it gives a name to the concept and it gives a symbol to the concept. This presentation is not about the diagrams. You can have a look at the handout if you're just interested in looking at some diagrams. What I'm interested in is the concepts, because, and this is the takeaway, communication requires that speakers and hearers share an understanding of the concepts the spoken words represent. And what we have in diagrams. We just have diagrammatic version of natural language. Drawers and readers must share an understanding of the concepts the diagram symbols represent. That is the issue with all these modern languages. Is it a perfect marriage? The bride and groom come from different families with different cultures. ArchiMate tries to present a coherent and consistent conceptual framework. It doesn't entirely succeed in doing that, but it certainly comes a lot closer than TOGAF, which tends to embrace any terms and concepts that any TOGAF contributor feels like putting in. So between TOGAF 8 and 9, the word capability became fashionable, and capability is now sprinkled all the way through every chapter, but every author has their own view of what capability is. Leading to incoherence, really. There's a lot of incoherence and inconsistency. I do teach TOGAF, and it is a struggle to manage that issue. For example, new authors, building block and service were absolutely fundamental terms in version 8, and the authors of version 9 managed to slightly change the meanings, or radically change the meaning of building block, slightly change the meaning of service. In some chapters, but not all, that's the problem. If it changes in all, that would be an issue. Function is different now from where it was. So, but if you know the history of TOGAF, and astonishingly most TOGAF tutors don't, there is a conceptual framework behind it. At least that's my position statement, if you like. So I'm going to compare what I think the conceptual framework of TOGAF is with that mark. A little bit about what happens before enterprise architecture. TOGAF has this graphic, which I'm quite keen on. One of the things I say, there's two takeaway messages. The one I've given you, and the other is that you should attend a British Computer Society training to British Computer Society professional certificates in enterprise institution architecture if you haven't done already. That's the second. And TOGAF has this graphic which it separates business planning and enterprise architecture. Almost the first thing I say on a BCS course is, I'm older than you lot, and I'm able to give you lessons for life. And the first lesson is never ever join an internet discussion group on enterprise architecture because it's consumed with what is enterprise architecture, and there are people who are convinced it is business planning. And my position is it's not business planning. There are people who do business planning, they're on the board. Enterprise architects are not on the board. There are people who do this stuff, and we certainly have to respect that stuff. They give us a direction. The TOGAF says business planning at the strategy level provides the initial direction to enterprise architecture. And it's got some words it uses in this statement: driver, mission, vision, blah, blah, blah. So these are the words. We are trying to capture the business direction, and it is true, of course, that enterprise architects may steer the business direction to some extent because we're in an increasingly digitised world. So I'm not saying that there's no two-way flow. Of course, there is two-way flow, but this stuff comes from the board. When we were putting the BCS syllabus together about 10 years ago, we looked at the Object Management Group's business motivation model. They have directives, design, results, courses of action. The principles of directives, the goals and objectives, the design results, and the strategies, the courses of action. We got these kind of higher level things. By the way, this is slightly, what is a strategy is an interesting question. In my research for putting together certificates and so on, I've had to do a lot of research into these kinds of things. Usually a strategy contains all this other stuff. It doesn't stand alone. Okay. So adding more words, the OMG have a few more words. Policies and rules, they can go in as directives. Tactics, well, what are tactics? Well, programs, projects, work packages there, and tactics. And about 10 years ago, when we were putting the BCS certificate together, that was a kind of mental model of this space.
Why is strategy a course of action?
Well, I say, well, and what strategy is in the real world is almost anything that board of directors decide to announce is a strategy. But usually it's equated with a high-level plan. So basically this is planning. I would call this is planning.
So planning is a better word than strategy?
Well, I would say planning here.
Yeah.
And then whatever you like. But I don't want to get too picky with this because all I'm going to say here is ArchiMate has some symbols in this area. It's got symbols that match with this picture. It's got some extra symbols. And if you want to represent your strategic kind of level thinking, business planning level, using ArchiMate symbols, you can. But it's not my interest here. TOGAF's primary business direction artifact is the driver goal objective catalogue. It maps the drivers, which stimulate drivers of forces acting on the business, which stimulate goals to be declared. Goals typically decompose into smart objectives, and the objectives are given to the organisation units, and there may be some kind of cascade of objectives. However, I would say that's all kind of input, context, motivation for architecture. It's not actually architecture itself. So enterprise architecture is what Kevin is in this room dismissing as engineering. That's his use of the word engineering. I would say we are engineering business systems in the broadest sense of the term engineering. So EA is not business planning. What is it then? It's business system planning in response to business planning. Business systems planning is actually where enterprise architecture came from in about 1980. So what is a business system? Well, my pet interest, which I can't get anybody else interested in the world, actually it's not true, I've got about 5 fans in the world, one in Australia, one in Canada, in system theory. There is something called general system theory, and most of it is about modelling what's called discrete event-driven systems, and everything we do in ArchiMate UML is about modelling discrete event-driven systems. Events trigger active structures or actors to perform behaviours or repeatable activities. Active structures, actor, organisation, component, module, node. TOGAF's actually built around the principle that for each node we can define the services it offers. It sometimes uses the word service portfolio. I think that now only appears once in TOGAF, or service bundle. So when we're looking at business systems, I thought QuickFit might be a nice example. I looked on the QuickFit website. I think I googled QuickFit business services. Oh, sorry, I've got that on the latest one. This is a bar. So I get quite a few people from Saudi Arabia on the courses, and I have to explain what a bar is before I can explain what a bar person is. No, I'm joking there. They do know. Serving customer, opening doors, closing doors, cleaning up. You can formalise what a bar person does. Now, of course, in real bars, it's not formalised, but enterprise architecture is about formalising that kind of thing. The second point here, the level of granularity is your choice. You can say serve customer, or you can define a finely grained service, take order, serve product, take payment. Service is a behaviour exposed at the interface of a system or component. So I've got the idea of an active structure, which provides a service portfolio. Each service is found in a service portfolio. A service is defined by a service contract. Probably not what most people think a service contract is. They think a service level agreement. That's more like a service level agreement. This is an individual, discretely triggerable service which takes something in, produces something out, updates something according to some rules, and it's got some quality measures associated with it. How do services get delivered? By the execution of processes. So now we've got the active structures performing the processes to deliver the services which can be found in a service portfolio. And the process is a sequence of stages, of steps. People like to call it value stream nowadays. I'll skip that, I don't have time to go over everything except the whole point is behaviours cannot perform behaviours. Structures perform behaviours, behaviours can't perform behaviours. We also have passive structure. So active structures perform processes which act on passive structure, which does not itself perform anything, but just sits there waiting to be acted on, and data is the obvious example. Data structures in this area. So in TOGAF, in the application area, we have application components or active structures, which provide a service portfolio. TOGAF doesn't really have a name for this, although it sometimes says interface. Provides information system service. TOGAF isn't really interested in the processes, only in the external representation of the services. The processes act on data entities, which are data components of the data architecture section of this section. In the business area, ArchiMate, TOGAF has something, ArchiMate has something in the data area, of course. In the business area, it has something called business object. people who looked at ArchiMate, what is a business object? Is it a material thing, or a data representation of that thing? Data sent in a data flow, or a data entity in a data store? Anybody? No idea what ArchiMate is?
It's more abstract than all those.
Sorry?
It's more abstract than all those.
Good.
More abstract than all those things. It's not a physics- it's not a
Well,
physical object.
if you look at the example in the TOGAF standard, it's actually a logical data flow, which can be conveyed. It is abstract in the sense that it's a data flow, independent of the data format. However, I don't think the definition is crystal clear enough to rule out any of those interpretations. So, the open group, their standards, this isn't entirely visible to all the people who write the standards, but the open group says that all standards should be based on the concept of executable specification. You define a system by what it does. This goes all the way back to the open group starting point, which was setting the Unix standard to put an end to the Unix wars, and they defined a Unix system by the set of services that it would provide discretely invocable operations. So here's my quick example. I call it Auto Express. What services can I ask from Auto Express? Fit tyres, check up full annual service, check brakes, repair brakes, etc., etc. Those are the things I can ask the business to do. I can define those services without knowledge of how those things are done. Just by, as a customer, that's what I want. So a unit of behaviour in TOGAF, a required behaviour or unit of work defined as a service requester sees it, maybe short or long, etc., etc. The unit of structure is what up to TOGAF 8 was called a building block. Building block then got loosened in terms of its meaning. People started using the word component instead of building block. Anyway, so for this presentation, building block components. So we've got a business system. You can decompose it into smaller subsystems and smaller subsystems and so on. And here I've got a service where somebody says to this business, do this please and give me the result. And there's a whole lot of stuff going on inside the system before eventually I get the result out. So the services I see it from a customer is that point of view. Build me a house, here's the architectural plans, and here's the house. Services may be long or short. Sometimes, many times, people say things like, oh, services are too fine-grained. Well, it's as fine-grained or coarse-grained as you want it to be. If you're a logistics company, FedEx, package delivery is your major service. And that one service is going to involve a huge number of building blocks in your company to get the package from one place. Okay, abstraction. I've used ArchiMate symbols here just to convince you I'm not making it up. There's many kinds of abstraction. The data architecture presentation, Sachin was talking about conceptual, logical, physical, real. That's idealization to realization. There's generalization to specialization. These are symbols for these in UML and ArchiMate. I'm not making this up. It's out there. It means there's composition or aggregation. I'm not going to distinguish these here, which is whole-to-part relationships. And there's delegation, client delegating to server, which again appeared in the data architecture presentation as a layer. Well, in ArchiMate, those are the symbols, and if you know TOGAF, they appear in TOGAF. We have, to our site here, business delegates to the applications delegate to the platform technologies. Composition, we have enterprise-wide thinking, segments within enterprises, and then capabilities, stroke solutions within that. Generalization goes foundation, common system, industry, organization. And in idealization, we have the required services we want, the logical building blocks we need to provide them, platform independent, in the same sense as Sachin was talking about physical and then deployed solutions. So, very quickly, this is generic to specific, universal, unique, and in TOGAF, that's foundation, common system, industry, organization. There's lots of variations on the conceptual, logical, physical, real thing. This is OMG's model-driven architecture. Zachman's version, and TOGAF has a version of that. If you know the enterprise continuum in TOGAF, what is it? It's generalization, idealization put into a matrix. Logical is implementation independent, such as platform independent, portable, supply neutral, physical, real world, description of a real world entity. But actually, the real world entity is still a description. TOGAF has a generic relation. There's a sort of fundamental point to understanding what the conceptual framework is in TOGAF. Services are clustered and assigned to logical components which are realized by physical components. And in my attempt teaching TOGAF to try to make it coherent and consistent to my audience, I'll say that's what you see through every layer. Business services are assigned to functions, which are logical organisation units. Activities are assigned to roles, which are logical actors. And we have the same thing in the application and technology layers. This is how many to many mapping. I'm going to skip that. Ideally, one logic application goes to one, actually physical here, that's a typo. In practice, you can have many to many relations. Now, in the business domain, if I put that in a little graphic, we've got our goals and objectives and business direction. We define the services that we're going to provide as a business to meet our goals and objectives. And then we think how we're going to deliver it. We've got a logical level of description, functions and roles, and we've got the physical level of organisation. Roles and logical actors realise roles. Functions are logical organisation units. Organisation realise functions. Why am I dwelling on this? Because TOGAF ArchiMate, for all its many qualities, is slightly screwed up on its structure behaviour distinction. So here I can say the same thing for each domain: information system, service logical, data entity, logical data component, our data architecture presentation. And then these logical elements are realised by this. Now this is, I think, what the meta model of TOGAF should look like. It's become a mess because it's designed by a committee. Okay, the general approach in TOGAF is the classic approach to baseline, moving to a baseline. You look at the physical baseline you've got, you ask what it's doing logically, you think, what do I want to do logically, required services logically, maybe these. In the business domain, we define business services, map to functions, map to the organisation units, and that pattern is repeated in each domain. The generic meta model that underpins ArchiMate is external-internal behaviour structure. Now this is what it looks like in ArchiMate. In the BCS reference one 10 years ago, we looked at TOGAF and ArchiMate, but it's just too complicated. And in effect, we simplified it to service portfolio, component, process, service, and data. Skip that. So, I would say this, I started with general system theory, and that's the simple version that we started with.